Hi, I'm John Paul and a really warm welcome back to my channel. What I'm going to talk about today is men in therapy and particularly men in overdrive. I'm going to explain what that means, but as you can probably imagine, and perhaps based on other videos that I've done, is that men in overdrive would be men that are dominated particularly by this drive place, by the sort of reward and drive place. And what I'm going to look at, first going to say what I mean by that and explain that a bit more, and then go on to talk about how it might manifest in therapy as far as perhaps how people come into therapy, what they do within therapy, and the difficulties I suppose it can present for therapy, and therefore for relationships generally, which I think can be the difficulty with being in this place consistently, and then finishing off with some things that he can hold in mind that hopefully going to be helpful if you recognize this in yourself and you want to be in a therapeutic relationship, or to be honest, improve any relationship that you might be in. So I'm going to come up with some ideas there as well, hopefully, which are going to be helpful. But so starting off, what do I mean by men in overdrive? We have the protection part, which is where fear and anger sit. So that's survival parts, how we stay alive. But that's number one. The second part we have is the drive part, the bit that I'll be focusing on today. And that's the part that is about competing, sort of living to compete, winning, more stuff, more status, more money, striving, proving ourselves. It's focused quite a lot on what other people think, because they're the things from a competition point of view that other people will see, of course. So it can be about appearance, as I say, material, wealth, status, those kind of things. That will be the preoccupation there, because there's competition is part of it, and winning. There can be a better or less than, that sort of inferiority, superiority way of seeing ourselves in relation to other people. And then thirdly, which I talk about a lot, of course, and I'm going to mention of course here too, is that part which is about connection. So that's about love of ourselves and others, liking others, feeling part of something bigger, there being an us, feeling part of an us rather than just isolated on our own, love of the community around us, feeling part of the community, caring for it, all those sorts of things, affiliation, friendship, teamwork, as I say, pretty evident in the word connection, I guess, but externally, connection with others and connection with the environment and things outside, but also particularly here, connection with ourselves too. As I've said throughout other videos as well, it is not to make any part that's part of human beings wrong. We need the part that's about protection, of course, to keep us alive. The reason we're here is we have the survival part, the fear and anger part, to keep us here. As we know, in other circumstances, sort of having too much anxiety, too much anger, which would be the feelings that sit there, we can be being overly protective, and that is problematic from the point of view of our well-being. But the one I'm going to focus on here is when we've got overdrive, so the one in the middle. Of course, addictions will sit there if we're looking at acquiring more. That's where the chemical would be dopamine, would be in this territory. We're looking for dopamine hits, fun, as I say, winning, building ourselves up bigger, winning competition. Sports would all sit here, and they, as you can say, with those things of themselves, they're valuable, fun additions to people's lives. They move people through life. They're reasons to get up. They're reasons to do things during the day. They're exciting for people. They make people feel alive. The trouble is when the qualities that are used to satisfy drives, and in relationships to get my drive satisfied, perhaps at work or elsewhere, if I transplant those qualities, all of them, onto, say, romantic relationships or relationships with children or friends, that can cause some difficulties. And that's the thing that I want to focus on. Again, it's not making any bad. It's just we want to make sure that we're not dominated by any one of them, that we're not at the mercy of any one of them. We don't want to be at the mercy of our anxiety or our anger if we're looking at the protective part, and we don't want to be at the mercy of our drives and striving and competition and always having to win and be superior. If we're looking at the drive part. So they are all of value. As I say, what we're looking at here is somebody who occupies that drive part perhaps more than is helpful for them in terms of their relationships. Because I think the thing that I'll show, it's not just that if we are in drive a lot, we are not using our thought, feeling, and behavioural energy in connection with self and others. It's also that a number of the qualities of drive that are necessary there are actually counter to getting our needs met in terms of connection often. and that's going to have an impact on our physical and mental health too. Just another sort of context thing to say in terms of these parts, a lot of people might say that they need to be in drive or for particular periods of life. So looking at, somebody during their 20s in terms of acquiring money, status, that kind of thing, well, let's do it during that period and then move more to a place of connection, perhaps bring that more to the fore in our 30s or something like that. The thing about that is that human beings are programmed to do in the future what we do in the past. So it is unlikely that we're going to be able to do that actually. And what people most likely do is carry on through their lives this place in this situation of overdrive, and then perhaps they burn out because to be in this place of connection, which I'm going to talk about, requires sort of different thought, feeling, and behavioural energy, different kinds of thoughts, different ways of being, perhaps different behaviours, and it's a different frequency. So in order to develop that, we need to be doing it. And therapy can be a great place to do that, which I'll come on to as well. But looking at the point of view of, stages of life thing, I think it's always something we should be bearing in mind, this place of connection and where it is in our lives and how we're putting thought, feeling and behavioural energy into it. Now, I'm particularly talking about men here because I know generalizations. The thing about therapy and being people's therapists, actually, people are more similar. If you're looking, whatever gender they identify, then they are different, actually. I could say, 10 things which are similar across men, women, non-binary people as to what causes their distress and what causes their happiness. But I think it is true to say, in terms of gender and men, they perhaps sit more in this drive place at times, and it is also perhaps more intense, the experience there. So that's why I'm talking about men in overdrive here. Ideally, what we're looking to do in life is to stay alive with protection, to have drive, of course, but actually to hook drive onto connection. I'll talk about that perhaps in more detail in another video, but they can certainly complement each other, drives. If we're striving for things that we love, and in a way that is consistent with like of ourselves and love of ourselves, then I think that's the important thing to be aiming for from the point of view of well-being for people. But just going into the therapeutic relationship and men in overdrive coming into the therapeutic relationship and just talking about the kind of things that I might notice that are perhaps more sort of common characteristics when these men come into therapy. I'm going to look at the beginning, the middle and the end, and also talk about, the content and dynamics too, and just say a few other things and finish with an example. Okay, so the beginning, the middle and the end. Men in overdrive might tend to come in at a later stage in terms of their distress. One of the things which I think is the case is if we're in drive is that relationships with other people tend to be about satisfying our drives. So a man in this place might not necessarily have that much experience of a relationship just being there as a way of sort of regulating himself and co-regulating. Often men in overdrive will be very sort of self-reliant. They'll be very self-regulating. So they'll know the behaviours, the substances, the ways in which to make themselves feel good. They will generally have less experience of relationships making them feel good. Of course, they might have lots of work relationships, but in those relationships, there are all the underlying dynamics of work, which are at play. They may also have friendships which focus around competition, but again, you can see there's the sort of winning-losing thing there, and it is often that the energy is not much. Those sort of qualities of connection, which I'm going to talk about, don't tend to be as present in relationships. You can really see why it would be a last resort in some ways to come to therapy, and they might be sort of threatened in by somebody, a partner perhaps, saying that you really need to go to therapy or, that's the end. Now, again, I can completely understand that. Those people who sit more in connection, they will know the benefit more of co-regulation in relationship and therefore be suggesting or even insisting that he come in. So he might come in under different circumstances. If you're looking at kind of the middle and the content, often things will be more about work, perhaps, than they may be about relationships. So you can see that often the things that people are at work a lot. That's completely understandable that somebody talks about work a lot and therefore at times relationships at work. But there is something which is clear that there isn't a lot of time necessarily, not a lot of thought, feeling, behavioural energy put into the kind of connected relationships outside of work, whether that's romantic relationships, friendships, family relationships. So as I say, content could be different. As far as dynamics, because drive is this place of competition, of winning, some things can feel slightly more competitive, I suppose. During conversations, there can be a sort of win-lose dynamic that can maybe be set up, and I'll talk about that when I talk about, give the example. So it's almost as if something might become a bit more of a debate or a negotiation. Of course, I would offer things as a therapist. I think if somebody's not in this place, or they're more used to sitting in a place of connection, they will perhaps hear something. If it fits for them, they'll say, yes, that does. If not, it will pass by. But I think there's something about the kind of competitive element of this place that if somebody occupies that a lot, it's almost as if he loses to agree to something or to take something in. Also, of course, holding in mind that within all human beings is the protective part as well, and there'll be very sort of keen protective part too. Then looking at sort of sense of self, if we're looking at being in that place of drive most of the time, what I need to be able to do there is, I've got an idea of what it is I want to get out of the situation, and I need to know how to do that and how to be able to achieve that with other people. Generally, therefore, these men will be very charming, very sort of pleasing socially. Of course, what that's about though is how to get other people to feel good. And the difficulty there could be if that's where a lot of my attention has gone out to others, whether they like me or not, whether that makes this where I'm going to be able to satisfy my drive, whatever that might be in this situation. I'm not necessarily thinking a lot about whether I like this person or who I am, who it is actually they're relating to. I can be different things in different environments depending on what I need to be in order to achieve what I want to achieve in that environment. And that, I think, can leave somebody knowing themselves very well and being very self-assured in perhaps a work environment, but not being quite sure who they are generally. There will be things that I'll probably be keeping out of the way in order to satisfy drives, perhaps particular emotions, perhaps fear, perhaps sadness. Those kind of things will not work necessarily from the point of view of meeting my drives, and it results in someone presenting a particular impression, or being very used to presenting a particular impression in order, as I say, to get their drive satisfied, and not really therefore knowing who they are. But bringing things back, to have that sort of a coherent narrative about self, that solid internalized sense of self is really important for all human beings, but particularly something that's key here. Because if you couple that with the fact of as well, they're often in environments where they know, they know what's happening as far as the business, but also they need to be seen to know. If someone asks a question, so when I was a lawyer, if someone asked a question to me, for me to say, oh, let's just be curious about this, or I wonder, well, I'm not really sure, why don't we explore that? It just doesn't work in those environments. So people, they need to know as well. They need to be seen to know. And it's difficult to be in environments where there's things are much more about exploration, perhaps more about curiosity. And if you look at a therapeutic environment, the things that work better for that do tend to be just being curious about things, to sit with the not knowing. Of course, there are helpful things that we know that we can talk about, tools, more cognitive things. We know a lot about the mind, the body, behaviours and all of those things which we can work on too. But there's also something about working with not knowing, being able to sit with that, and I guess the discomfort of that. And it's particularly difficult, I think, with men in overdrive to sit with not knowing and to be seen not to know, and for that to be okay. If you add, if I lose, potentially a sort of winner-loser type dynamic, if you add that, couple it with debate, with perhaps being quicker to irritation or frustration, if somebody's feeling unsafe or not knowing, those things can make it more difficult to take in what's coming. Actually, things that are offered can be received, can actually disconnect. And then you combine all of that, of course, with the fact that somebody may not have the trust of relationship to say when they have a difficulty with something, or they're feeling frustrated or disconnected or switched off. They may not even notice that it's something that's happening because they have gone through life not necessarily, as a lot of us have, not necessarily looking at what's happening as far as feeling states in their body. So they may not know it's happening. As far as communicating, it's difficult to communicate because it's not what they're used to doing in relationships. So there isn't the ability then to actually work with it in the relationship, because that's the thing. If somebody's feeling disconnected, or it doesn't feel like therapy is working for them, or they are having a great time, or whatever it might be, the thing is, the idea of therapy, the ideal, isn't it, is to bring it all, to trust the relationship enough, to be at rest enough in the relationship, to bring in everything. And if that is difficult to say, I struggle to bring in anything, just to talk about it. For a lot of people, not talking about things was a way to keep them safe. But the thing is, and what we get from a therapeutic relationship is hopefully to see that, to voice what's happening for us, whatever that is, to be able to tolerate everything we think, tolerate everything we feel, and be able to voice and express that, is the thing that's going to keep us safe. And actually not just keep us safe, but connect us to another and enable us to co-regulate with another human being. Often then, as you might expect, if something is not necessarily talked about or it's difficult to talk about, somebody might act their feelings out. So as far as endings, these men in overdrive may end sooner than people generally do. And they might also end more suddenly and might not have a conscious ending, sort of work through an ending, avoid the ending. And that means an ending isn't honoured. That means that we're not able to talk about what was helpful, what was unhelpful. Because as for most of us, that isn't something that generally happens in life. But it is also something very important that comes from therapy. It's something that's very helpful that can come from therapy. Of course, if somebody wants to end too by communicating what it is that they're finding difficult or what they didn't like, the ideal is that something could change within the relationship too. But often men in overdrive don't necessarily have the belief that relationship can change and be different in order to work better for them. And I said at the beginning, or earlier on when I was talking, that the difficulty with being an overdrive, or one of the difficulties can be, it's not just that we're not spending time developing those qualities that work better for connection and relationship, like curiosity, like patience, those sorts of things. It's that we can positively and actively turn against them in that place. If you use the example of empathy, for example, that is a strong component of connection and connected relationships, and you would associate it with therapists in some ways, to empathise with others. Somebody in this place of overdrive can often experience empathy, I think, as pity. So they will, it's somehow that somebody might be trying to put themselves above them, feel a bit sorry for them, that kind of thing. So it's not received in the way that, from my point of view, in terms of empathy, perhaps it would be intended. And to add to that, of course, something like empathy, sadness, tears, fear are contrary and may undermine someone's ability to satisfy their drives and to push forward and strive for their goals. And I just wanted to use an example of that, as I mentioned at the beginning. If you talk about, say, a man in overdrive comes in and talks about having experienced bullying, I understand completely from the point of view of being bullied that will probably increase somebody's protective part. So he might become more protective, more fearful, but perhaps more angry. Perhaps more protection certainly will keep him alive. It may also increase the drive part and spend more time in the drive part because somebody is striving to deal with the pain and discomfort and difficulty and perhaps sense of inferiority that comes from bullying. So if they strive and win and achieve, they can feel good about themselves and feel validated and of worth and value in a way that somehow counters that feeling of perhaps powerlessness and the difficulty and distress they experience as a result of the bullying. And I may have spoken to somebody who's mentioned bullying, and I will have said, that must have been difficult for you. And what may come back from somebody, a man in overdrive, is he might say, no, it made me stronger. Often when people are in overdrive, they will see things in terms of weak and strong. And of course, to show emotion, to show fear, for example, or sadness will be associated with weakness, and strength will be to show no feeling at all. And I understand as far as surviving, maybe that's helpful. I understand that as far as the sort of striving and winning and status and achieving those sorts of things, that not to show your fear, not to show your sadness, may have been helpful for that. That powering on through to prove yourself may be one of the reasons why you've been so successful in your career. We can hold those as true and acknowledge those, I think, and also acknowledge that if you're looking at connection and like of myself and like of others, being bullied is going to make me like myself less and make me like and trust other people less. at least theoretically, we would all need to agree with that. But I might say to a man who said, oh no, it made me stronger, it made me achieve lots of things in life. I mean, I can say, well, I can see that too. I can also see this is an that it may have made things more difficult in terms of connection with self and other people. And then you might get into a situation where somehow I'm trying to take away, or perceived as trying to take away, some sort of layer of protection, which is obviously not the case at all, or somehow trying to say something which is going to adversely affect his capacity to achieve and strive and satisfy those drives. So you can see perhaps how it can introduce difficulties into a therapeutic relationship where empathy is going to be offered if it's perceived as somehow going to be damaging. Actually, it's going to reduce my protectiveness of myself. It's going to lessen my effectiveness as far as satisfying my drives. You can really see how for somebody they would reject that. But to reject empathy, or to perceive it as pity or sympathy, rather than somebody using their imagination to imagine what you feel like and therefore a bridge, some way of connecting and to sort of resonate between two human beings, or to regulate between two human beings, you can see that how that can get in the way of relationship. And I say this is a therapeutic relationship, but though these sorts of elements will also potentially play out in all kinds of relationships too, and therefore be potentially disconnecting there. So with all that in mind, what I wanted to do next, and to finish off on, is just look at what might help, and hopefully say some things which are going to be helpful as far as sustaining that relationship and building that relationship, and therefore for relationships generally. The first of those things is, of course, please do to come to therapy if there is this protective place, and that's very well developed. If there is this overdrive place, and of course that's very well developed, that's great. Lots of skills, qualities that are within that. Therapy is really a place where you can put more thought, feeling, behavioural, by attending, of course, energy into that connection place, more like of self and others. Who am I? How do my behaviours serve, connecting with myself? What's meaning and purpose for me? What are my boundaries? What am I like in relationships with other people? Are those relationships connecting? Can they be improved? All sorts of ways. Because the thing is, whatever somebody's distress, however they come in therapy, for the vast majority of human beings, the reason that people have difficulties, whether that's anxiety, their depression, whatever it is, their addictions, has been through as a result of relationships and difficulties that have happened in relationships, often during early experience, either things that have happened to them or things that have been lacking in early relationship. And of course, therapy, with the right therapist, with a good therapist, provides that relationship. It means that the things that were not as present as they could have been during early experience can be present now. So I do, of course, hope that you do come. I also, another thing is to acknowledge, from as far as empathy for ourselves, is that it's hard. To do that, for the reasons that I've described. It isn't necessarily people's natural territory. They're used to doing things a particular way. We are all used to doing that. And I suppose therapy, if you're looking at curiosity, empathy, more sitting with something, talking about things, saying we don't know, and being comfortable with that certain personality types find that much easier than others. So it can be difficult. Of course, it is a risk. It feels dangerous. It might feel unsafe psychologically to come into that environment. And that's hard. People don't want to do things where they feel unsafe. Anxiety encourages us to avoid things. The other thing that can make it difficult, of course, is that there are lots of things that are built up around this overdrive place that really reinforce it. We're around lots of people potentially who share similar values. It's also hugely respected in terms of material wealth, winning in competitions, bonuses, money, physically looking a particular way. There's a real halo effect to them. They're hugely admired, respected amongst lots of people in the sort of societies we live in often. And that's very powerful from a sort of evolutionary point of view, even from a very compelling, basic human point of view. But of course, what I'm not suggesting here is that is going to be compromised, or that those things shouldn't happen, or that somebody's wrong for doing those things at all. It's just making sure we are also putting energy into this connection part in terms of relationship with self and others, because that will only enhance the other parts. It will only support that part that's about protection with self, and it will only enhance our drive part, I think, and make sure that things aren't happening that are contrary to our psychological well-being and our physical well-being. But it requires a different way of looking at things often. It requires different ways of thinking about things. It requires, different language. And often somebody might say to me that, well, life is good enough as it is. It's a bit like, well, they have a good bike. Somebody might say, why should I spend lots of money on a better bike? It is interesting that somebody might use the example of a bike, because I would say that's much more that place of drive, isn't it? The difference between having a faster bike and winning something, the temporary high that you might get from that, which is always going to need to be bettered, and the difference between that and putting energy, thought, feeling, behavioural energy into relationship and a more connected relationship with yourself, liking the world more, all the sorts of things I've been talking about, is a profound change in somebody's quality of life. It's not just the temporary high that we'll get from being faster at something. I mean, I'll come on to it, can happen if this is something that you do, but it really is something, as I say, that can profoundly improve your quality of life in all ways. But the difficulty can be, of course, if we haven't experienced, we don't know how good it feels. And then I suppose I go back to that trust of something, just trusting the process. Because you absolutely can do it. We all have very plastic brains. There's all sorts of things that you will have learnt to do that perhaps you didn't ever think you could do just before you'd done them. So what I would say, if you're in therapy, often men in overdrive will look for tools, and tools are important. They are absolutely a part of therapy. But I think it's important to treat the therapeutic relationship actually as one of the tools. So if you're fearful about something or nervous about talking about something or think, I shouldn't say that, actually to bring that into relationship can be one of the most significant experiences that comes from therapy. As I say, I think it's really important to trust the relationship to the extent that you can. Tell any story, say anything that you can, bring anything. Often in this place, people won't necessarily tell stories that much. So, and again, if you don't want to tell stories, it feels strange. It's just to bring that into relationship, isn't it? No rights, no wrong. It's just to bring all of your thoughts and feelings into a place where it's all going to be accepted and understood. What we want, I think, if we're looking at the types of things perhaps you could talk about in therapy as well, it could be, what are the qualities, as I say, to satisfy drives that I need, that I'm very good at? Also, what are the qualities that might work in relationship, and how to like myself, to have a more connected relationship with other people and the world? What are the differences between those two, so that I can make sure that I'm using these qualities in this environment, and that I'm not trying to transplant, pushing something forward, pushing my frame onto another in romantic environments or in environments with children, if I'm trying to be regulated, that in a work environment maybe to use some assertiveness, perhaps even to get annoyed or angry, to push that through might be helpful. Will that be as helpful if I'm in that sort of long game, long-term relationship with a romantic partner? Will the need to win there serve me well in the way that it may serve me in a negotiation at work? All of these things could be looked at. So I think it can be helpful to define your success and to know what you have in mind as success as far as the drives and that place. So, and a lot of people are very clear, these men in overdrive are quite clear about what they want, what is success in their life. I think it can also, something that could be talked about in therapy and looked at in therapy, is what success is going to mean in terms of connection as well. What success in relationship? Maybe success in relationship could be being able to, if there are children around, for example, being able to contain their frustration and annoyance and to regulate them. It's those sorts of things that children remember. People remember us for how they feel around us, for how we make them feel. And I think one of the difficulties of disconnecting from our felt experience, which is often going to be necessary in order to move through things at work, if we come away from our own feelings, we will also struggle to contain and regulate other people's. So we will struggle, for example, with other people's tears. We might go away from people to cry. We might, as I say, struggle with somebody else crying in front of us. Those sorts of things are signs that that connection place has not had the energy that the place of drive has, or the protective part of us has. So I think we can really think about, as I say, what is success there? What do I think is successful there? It could be regulating a child. It could be crying in front of somebody. It could be just listening to somebody, really listening to them, focusing on everything they say rather than trying to fix something. Yeah, all sorts of things it can be, but helpful to think about, I think, from a cognitive point of view. The other thing that I would say about this is I don't think we have a choice, unfortunately. We have the protective part of us, we have the drive part of us. If we are in overdrive, that's already got a lot of energy. The only choice for helping ourselves to feel better, whatever's happening, is actually going to be through relationship. I'm not therefore saying that it has to be through a therapeutic relationship at all, but really it is through an improved relationship, through liking ourselves more, through feeling more connected to others, our environment, something bigger, having more of an us, and working on that I think is the only way through. I don't think there's another choice. Of course, if somebody finds that there is, as far as human beings, something else that we can put our energy and time and effort into that's going to help with the sorts of distress that human beings experience, then gosh, let me know. But I think from what I've seen and from what I've learned, this is the place where it needs to go. As I say, that doesn't therefore mean that a therapeutic relationship is the only place for it. But certainly, it can be podcasts, it can be all sorts of other things, ways of connecting with self and ways of connecting with others and changing things in relationships. But that really is, as I say, the way that I think things need to go if we're going to improve our quality of life in this way. So just to finish off, I'm just going to talk about, if we don't do this, and then if we do this, if we look at if we don't do this, people will survive generally. I think the trouble is over time, though, there's a cumulative effect of being in this place consistently, of overdrive at the expense of connection, and people can burn out. I think that's often what's happening. It's not feeling connected to themselves, not listening to their bodies, not doing the things that they love, but doing things where they're striving for more material status, what other people think, all those kind of things, and that is at times at the expense of what they feel. And I think, I've done a video on burnout, so if you can look at that and see what you think about that. But I think that's what's happening there. So I think over time, often people don't get a choice anyway, from the point of view of their physical health and their mental health too. The other thing as well, of course, is that other people in our lives, perhaps if they're in that place more of connection, they will struggle with it potentially over time as well. And that's sort of going back to the beginning, that often people are told to come into therapy to put more energy into this place, because there's a cumulative effect for the other person for living with them. As I've said, if I am not paying as much attention as I could to what I feel, if it's not that important to me, and if what's prioritised is my protection and also these drive parts, there is the potential that I'm not worrying or concerned as much as I could, or paying as much attention to what those loved ones around me feel. And that can mean at times that people feel hurt and invalidated and distressed and get into difficulty. And I genuinely don't think that the men that I meet that are in overdrive would want that to be the case. It's just a matter of how that's going to be different. So, we can look at legacy if there are children around. Of course, it's great to be left significant amounts of money, or to be growing up in environments where these men are highly respected, and, to be proud of a parent in that way is really important. And also a legacy as far as children too, as I say, if they're around. How about in terms of more connection qualities, how they regulate their anger, what they do with their sadness, because it's those kind of things, what their empathy is like, it's those sorts of things that sustain long-term relationships, for example, and friendships and romantic relationships and their relationships with their children. And I think for most of us, no matter how much money somebody has or where somebody is, their happiness or otherwise is going to be affected by their internal relationships, so the kind of things they're saying to themselves. But certainly you're only as happy as your least happy child. And if your marriage isn't going brilliantly, your relationship, if that's where you are, if your relationship isn't going brilliantly, whatever money you have or whatever you can enjoy from a fun point of view is probably not going to compensate for that. So looking at our current effect on people is important, and also looking at what we want to leave future generations as far as how we model things for them, how we model our relationship with our emotional world and theirs. And finally, finishing up with, if you do this, as I say, I think the difficulty can be for a lot of people, we don't know how good it feels to do it, or how it can change life in order to do it, if that's not something that we've experienced. But what I'm suggesting here, as I say, as far as more connection with self, is to like ourselves more, in very general terms, and as far as more co-regulating better relationships with other people, those things, they are enduring sources of happiness and contentment and meaning and fulfilment for people. What dying people tend to preoccupy about are telling people they love them, asking for forgiveness, giving forgiveness, and saying thank you. Gratitude, forgiveness, love, they are all connection qualities. So what you can see there is it's very usual for human beings to spend our lives trying to protect ourselves and also in this place of drive and acquiring more. But if you are in this place of connection more and combine it with drive and of course have that place of protection, then at the end of our lives, we're not going to need to tell people we love them, because that is something that they will know and that we'll have been showing them throughout our lives. If we always keep something back or hide things, as I say, might be cry alone, whatever that might be, or don't tell people that we're fearful, people aren't able to love those parts too. So, I mean, they may not change and we remain in distress, those parts, but also we don't get to know that other people will accept and love them. You know, I think if we work more on connection, whether that's in therapy or outside of it, we'll realise that there's nothing that you can say, there's nothing that you can bring into a trusting relationship that will ruin it. And that means we'll be able to tolerate everything we think, we'll be able to tolerate everything we feel, and that means we'll be able to do that for other people as well. And that all results in much more connected, enduring, sustaining relationships. And as a result of that, of course, so our physical health will be better too. These difficulties psychologically, emotionally, if people experience loneliness or disconnection or separation or chronic anger or addictions, of course, they all adversely affect our psychological well-being, but that's a direct effect on our body as well and our physical well-being as well. So it's going to improve all areas of life, I believe. And working on connection means that you can rest in relationship rather than protecting yourself or needing to win or compete. It means you can rest, be who you are, be open, honest, and other people are going to be able to be that with you too. And as I say, generally that gives us a bigger plate from the point of view of capacity for things in life, a wider bandwidth to enable us to cope with all the sorts of things that come with the sorts of complicated lives that people lead now. And I just wanted to finish off with a quote. It's one by Henry Thoreau, which is that most men lead lives of quiet desperation and die with the song still in them. It sounds quite dramatic, I know, but you can see that in this place of overdrive, perhaps in overprotection as well, how somebody can lead a life where quiet, albeit quiet, desperation, because it seems all wonderful, but they don't feel good, and then die with the song still in them. That song that can come from these more connected relationships, liking ourselves more, liking other people more, being more, feeling more part of our community and part of the world. So let's avoid that. That's not an inevitability for men. It's not an inevitability for any human being. Okay, so I hope that's been helpful, interesting. Do let me know. Of course, as ever, do put some comments under the video of anything you would like to say. If you would prefer to email me separately, please do that via the website. Please do like the video if you liked it and subscribe if you haven't already. And I shall see you again soon. Thanks for watching.